National Bank, a Franklin family community bank, proudly sponsors Veterans of the Valley. Since 1862, First National has provided local decision-making and accessibility, as well as banking products and services to Brazos Valley citizens.
Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbyville. Of the 30 years that Lee McClesky served his country as an Air Force flyer, one day does stand out. February the 22nd, 1967, an attack mission out of Thailand into North Vietnam. It was the day his A-26 Invader took off but did not land. He had many, many better days of service in the Air Force, and yes, today as a volunteer for the Brazos Food Bank. Please welcome to Veterans of the Valley, Colonel Lee McCleskey of College Station. Lee, it's an honor to have you on Veterans of the Valley, and again, thank you for your service. You were born in Georgia. You wanted to go to school and study agriculture and be a farmer, but your life took another path. You never got to be a farmer. You may still yet get to be a farmer.
It's not over.
Indeed. Talk about your schooling first, because you were told about this relatively new school in Colorado called the Air Force Academy. Sort of take us from there and sort of how your military service continued from there.
All right. The Air Force Academy was 2 years old when I graduated from high school in '57. I had an excellent teacher in the senior year, and she was a close family friend too. And since her husband had been an attack pilot in Korea, she was kind of interested in looking around for people who might be good for the Air Force, in her opinion. So somehow I got identified as a tractor driver, and so she suggested that if I was at all interested in going there, that she would help me with the paperwork. Well, that paperwork scared me more than the rest of it, so she did, and lo and behold, I wound up receiving an appointment there. Spent 4 years at the academy, the first year being in Denver, where the temporary site was, and then the permanent site at Colorado Springs was completed. Right. And we moved down there in the summer of '58 and graduated in summer of '61. Right. And immediately went to flight school in South Georgia, in Valdosta, Georgia.
Right, Moody?
At Moody, yes. From Moody, I drew a first assignment as an instructor pilot, and that was at Laughlin at Del Rio.
Right. And
we spent 4 years there.
And you enjoyed that, didn't you?
Oh, very much so. We really liked Del Rio at that time.
Right.
Then from Laughlin, it came time to go to the war, and I received an assignment to do my part in the Vietnam operation.
Indeed.
In A-26s.
Right.
An old World War II and Korea airplane, right. But it had been modified, and it was actually the forerunner of today's A-10, right. Except it was propeller driven as opposed to jet.
Right. I want to go a step back in how you got into the A-26. You had been an instructor in T-37s and T-38s, and you got a call from Randolph. Sort of talk about that phone call that you
Yes, that was interesting. I was called to personnel for my assignment, and since I had nothing but a jet background, they wanted to know if I was a volunteer, and I said, volunteer for what? And he said, I can't tell you, it's a classified assignment. So I told the sergeant I didn't want to volunteer for something that I didn't know was on the other end. So he called Randolph and told them that, and he said, he won't tell me. He's sitting right here, but he won't tell me. And so they said, well, tell him. So they told me what it was, and I said, yeah, I'll try that.
Right, because there was another plane that you weren't really interested in flying,
Yeah,
the Bird Dog, right?
I didn't want to fly the Bird Dog, the O-1 FAC airplane in particular. Low and slow didn't impress me.
Indeed, indeed. The A-26, now you sort of regarded this as possibly an experiment because you had been in jet aircraft, and now you're to an old World War II and Korea plane, a propeller-driven
That's
airplane.
right. The airplanes had been modified in the early 60s to bring them up more to date, but they were still World War II airframes. Another instructor pilot from T-38s who had been instructing at Webb at Big Spring was assigned to the A-26 too at the same time that I was. And that's when I thought, just standing back, looking at some of the other air crews, it looked to me like it was somebody's social experiment there that we were entered into.
Right. Talk a little bit about the job of the A-26 and your job. This was an attack aircraft.
It was attack. We were not used in, well, we were used in close air support in some occasions, but it was in support of Laotian resistance forces in northern Laos, or the primary mission was truck killing, the destruction of trucks on the Ho Chi Minh Trail in North Vietnam and in Laos. And it was at night, and it was single ship. So we were out there working alone in the dark.
So you essentially were looking for enemy convoys of trucks.
Exactly, and trying
to eliminate
destroy
them.
Yes.
And to eliminate.
Right.
As we referred to in the opening, there is one day, February the 22nd, 1967. Obviously a day that you will never forget. Take us through that day, what your mission was, and sort of take us through what happened. That
particular evening, I was scheduled for a mission into northern Laos. And before we left the briefing area, we were told that reconnaissance aircraft had reported numerous truck convoys out in the center of Laos. And they had asked us from the headquarters down in Saigon to divert everything we could against those convoys. So our mission was changed to go straight out into Laos in the center south of Mugia Pass. One of my buddies, that fellow I referred to earlier as having been at Webb in the T-38s, was just returning from a mission, and the commander opted to reload him with nothing but ordnance because adding flares too, which we had to use because of the darkness, would delay him in getting out there. And since I had a double load of flares, they said, all right, you two team up. As I said before, we normally flew single ship, but in this case I understood what they were talking about, and so did he, and he couldn't wait to get out there anyway. So we were teamed and went out and joined up, and we did find a convoy.
Right. Not exactly what was advertised, but you found a convoy. Right?
Yes. As was often the case, the intelligence didn't quite come true in all aspects.
Reality, right?
I don't think Mr. Bush lied at that time, but but that's the story didn't come out quite that way. But we did find a convoy of about 10 trucks, 8 or 10, something like that. And so since I had the flares, I provided flare support for him, and he attacked, and I also provided flak suppression. That is, anybody who was shooting at him, I returned fire for him. And after he had expended his ordnance, then we switched positions, although I had the flare, but he provided the flak suppression while I finished the convoy up.
Right, right, right. And go on.
Well, we had been, both of us had been harassed by a particular gun emplacement which happened to be very close to the convoy. And we were making passes along the convoy, and this guy was getting closer and closer with his machine gun. So I opted to take him out by just letting the nose of the airplane rise a little with a .50 caliber machine guns in the nose, so that it was on him, and then I sprayed the woods pretty good where he was. Well, that put me down pretty low under the flares, and when I pulled off, I kind of turned into a silhouette for a gun that was about 5 miles to the south, a 37 millimeter anti-aircraft gun, like Jane Fonda made famous. And the guy got off a pretty good shot at me, because one of those rounds hit me in the bottom of the airplane and blew a large hole in the right main fuel tank, and we lost 250 gallons of gasoline. At today's prices, that would have been pretty expensive. But it also started a small fire.
Right.
So it was time to go home.
Right.
And we headed back home at that point.
I want people to understand that we're talking about, it's about 2 a.m. in the morning, so this
That's
is
right.
pitch black,
Yep.
that all of this is going on. So
Absolutely.
when your plane's on fire, that illuminates pretty good. You know that it's on fire.
That's right.
Right, right.
Because it was in the area of the right engine, we talked about, and my buddy was coming back with me in the other airplane, and he and I were discussing back and forth whether we might be able to stop the fire by shutting the engine down. So I did. I shut the engine down, and he said, no, that didn't do it. We had the option of firing what they call a fire bottle in there, some foam suppression stuff. So I fired one of those, and he said, you almost got it. Well, then I had to decide, all right, how long do I sit with that and wait for it to come back, or try to put it out right now? Well, I waited a couple of minutes, and he said, it's coming back pretty good. So I said, all right, I'll try the second one. And I did. And he said, you almost got it. So
Almost in the key word here.
no,
though.
that's right.
You're right.
So we were stuck with that. I had no more ways to fight the fire. And with the engine already shut down, we just decided to work our way back, hopefully out of enemy territory. I was not too enamored about having to bail out where the enemy was.
Certainly not. About how far were you from the river that would have?
We were about 60 miles or so out in the center, maybe a little more.
And not a whole lot of fuel, because you lost 250 gallons immediately.
Yes, although I wasn't burning but half as much fuel, so yeah, I had enough to make it.
You had enough to make it.
Yes, it was fairly early in the mission, well, about the middle of the mission, and that was one of the advantages of the airplane, is it had what are called long legs. It had a long endurance time.
Right, right. But your plane was still on fire, so you're trying to get back home.
Yes, and my friend was back about a mile or so behind me and slightly off to the side, and we were working our way back with discussions going on over the radio back and forth, and it began to look like we might make it, although I was not enamored with the idea of, because it was burning under the airplane, trying to land on a pierced steel planking runway with sparks going everywhere, and that is gear up, causing the sparks to go everywhere. But that would have been better than bailing out, I thought at the time.
Sure, sure.
As we progressed along, the fire continued to spread. We heard the right main gear tire explode because it had burned in that area. There was a glass plate in the floor of the cockpit between my feet where I could see into the nose gear area, and I could see the fire burning through that glass plate. That was not a comforting thought either. Then as we approached the river, the Mekong River between Laos and Thailand, we felt a series of small explosions. I say we, my navigator and I. And my buddy who was following us said, you're coming apart, and you're about to blow up, is what he was saying without saying it directly. And I had, just as he said that, I had reached up and jettisoned the canopy, and so we could bail out. We had no ejection seats in the airplane. It was strictly a manual bailout. Well, my navigator had a little difficulty getting out, got blown down by the wind blast over the back of his seat, and we struggled with his departure for a little while. And I let go of the airplane to help him, and I looked around. The airplane was pretty much out of control. Well, it was doing some things it shouldn't have been doing. So I stopped helping him, got the airplane back in control, and then assisted him in getting over the side. And I immediately turned and bailed out myself as soon as he had left. Sometime between the time I left the cockpit and the time my parachute opened, my airplane disintegrated. So I guess you could say I rode it as far as I could.
Exactly.
We had just crossed the Mekong River back into Thailand,
Right.
and we're not too far from the base.
Right, right.
Both of us had good parachutes, and
But as you were coming out, I want to step back a second. As you were coming out of the plane, you had ripped your flight suit on something, and your exposed leg hit the tail stabilizer, right?
yes, airplane didn't have a good history of successful bailouts, and I can see why. I did hit the tail on the way out with the back of one leg, and that's why I spent some time in the hospital after that. But the manual said for a controlled bailout that you put down some electrically operated flaps to increase the downwash over the wing so you would clear the tail. Well, if you have been having electrical trouble up to the bailout point and things are frantic, there's hardly any time to fool with electric flaps.
Right.
I probably could not have gotten them down.
Right.
So maybe that's why I hit the tail. Maybe it's because I didn't dive deeply enough. I don't know. But
So both you and your navigator had good shoots.
we did. And we landed within about a mile of each other in a rice paddy that's as hard as this floor here, because it was a dry season in northeast Thailand. We were then the beneficiary of a free helicopter ride back to the base. They scrambled 2 Jolly Green Giants for us, and I say they, the wing
Right.
commander, because he had been monitoring this whole thing over the air as we were coming back. And it was one of the first night pickups of the war.
Is that right? Yeah.
There was some concern, even though we landed in Thailand, that we were very close to a North Vietnamese village. North Vietnamese who had evacuated Dien Bien Phu in that area, or the North Vietnam, after the fall of Dien Bien Phu in 1955. We didn't know what their allegiance was, so they didn't want to take any chances with us getting captured by a local villager.
Right, right, right. I want to pause right now, and I want to go to some photographs before we run out of time, and then we'll come back. And there's another aspect to this story that I want you to talk about also. Let's go ahead and go to some pictures, just a few pictures that we have. There you are. About where was that picture taken in your career?
That was taken at the Pentagon
Okay.
just before I went to my last assignment at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson.
Okay. When was this taken?
Interestingly, that one was taken in Austria while I was on air attaché duty in Vienna.
Right.
And I was flying with the Austrian Air Force. They were kind enough to give me a ride.
I see. There's a picture of you getting a congratulations from...
That was when I initially received my attaché assignment, and that's the Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence for the Air Force.
Okay. Next picture. This is a pretty good representation of the T-38, which is what you initially trained in.
Yes, that's what I flew air superiority over West Texas in.
Right. Right. Now here is not an exact representation. This is an A-26, not an exact representation of what you flew in Vietnam. Talk about the difference between the airplane that we're looking at and what you flew.
I don't think that one has but 6 machine guns in the nose, but it's the same place. And the major difference externally like that is that The one I flew had been modified to put tip tanks on it, which gave us much more fuel and endurance.
But this is essentially the airplane you flew,
Yes,
the
that's
A-26.
right.
And I think we have one more shot of it from the. Okay, no, that was the A-26 right there. This is the medals and some of your awards that hang in your home. And of course, obviously the one that I'm sure that everybody recognizes, the top row, second from the right, the Purple Heart that you received, and many other commendations. What are there's a Silver Star in there?
Yes, there are 2 silver
Still
stars.
2 Silver Stars.
Yes.
Right.
And
I know you're very proud of that. And this last picture is of your sons, quite a few years ago. But I know you're proud of that picture because they were all Scouts. They're all Aggies. Have been in the military, some of them, and those are your sons. You also have a daughter. But that's a great picture, so I just wanted to show it.
we're pretty proud of them because they all did make Eagle Scout.
Right.
And,
Right. And all 4 of your children are Texas A&M grads and doing very well. I want to go back and put you in that cockpit on February the 22nd, 1967, because you told me something that I know that's very important to you. You heard a voice, and it wasn't your navigator, and it didn't come over your radio. Talk about that.
I did. This was at probably at the height of the frantic period. We were about 2/3 of the way back, and the electrical problems were growing, and the fire was growing. And as clear as crystal, I heard a voice that said to me, "Don't worry, it's going to be all right." There is no doubt in my mind that was the voice of God speaking. And here I am, so I guess it worked out.
Indeed. Unfortunately, this ending is not a happy ending completely.
No.
And if you can, tell me why.
Yes. Earlier I referred several times to my friend and his A-26 following me back. That's the sad part of the story. Either he flew through my debris when my airplane blew up, or he had what is called a sympathetic explosion from some ordnance he had left on board. I think he had some rockets. And regardless of what caused it, he went into, as observed by a flare ship overhead, he went into a flat glide and crashed there in northeast Thailand, and he and his navigator were killed that night.
Right. This was just 1 year of your 30 years of service that we've talked about, your 1 year in Vietnam, and we've spent an awful lot of time talking about one day out of that year, but obviously I wanted people to hear that story. You were out of Vietnam and back home after 1 year, but your career just went everywhere, including actually 2 tours and a final tour of Texas A&M also. So sort of take us after Vietnam, sort of take us your career, the places that you went and the things that you did. We've got about 5 minutes, so go quickly.
Okay. After I came back from Vietnam, I was assigned to England Air Force Base in Alexandria, Louisiana, teaching air-to-ground gunnery in a smaller airplane than the A-26.
Right.
But it was for South Vietnamese pilots as well as American pilots on the way to the war. From there I went to the Air Force Intermediate School, Air Command and Staff College, and then to a headquarters staff job in Europe, in Germany, at Wiesbaden and Ramstein. Coming out of Ramstein was when I picked up the ROTC assignment to Texas A&M, not on a voluntary basis.
Right.
Fought it all the way, but it didn't do any good. It turned out, though, it was one of the best tours we had in the Air Force.
Right.
We really enjoyed being here, and I guess we got Aggie smeared on us because of all the kids having been graduates from there.
Right.
After leaving here, I went back to another Air Force school and then on to England for a tour with the U.S. Singular Airborne Command Post, and then from there over to the job as base commander at a major fighter base in Germany called Hahn Air Base. And from Hahn was when I was offered an assignment to Vienna as the air attaché at the embassy. And we had wanted to go to Switzerland as the air attaché. I say we, my wife and I,
Right.
thought we loved Switzerland, so we thought that'd be good. But Austria was excellent too. We still have friends from all over
Right.
who were there with us.
Spent 3 years there, right?
3 years in the embassy in Vienna, and then back to the Pentagon for a 4-year tour in the office of the Defense Intelligence Agency Inspector General.
Right.
Then I was running out of time for 30 years in the Air Force, and I was offered an assignment to Davis-Monthan in Tucson as a deputy for intelligence in the Tactical Air Control Wing there. So we had a blast in Tucson for the last 2 years.
Right. And then finally back to Texas A&M, where you came to work for General Darling, right?
Yes, after I retired in Tucson, I realized that I still like to eat and I needed a job, so I was asking around, and fortunately found out a job came available here, or was coming available, and General Darling agreed to talk with me, and he let me have the job. And so I worked with the Corps of Cadets for about 7 years,
Right.
and then moved from the Corps over to being the safety officer for the physical plant operation, and had a great time doing that too. It's hard to say. I worked with about the same age person, male and female, over in the physical plant. There were a bunch of older, but about the same age with a number of them as I had worked with in the Corps. And they were a great bunch of people, as were the cadets.
It was indeed a wonderful career, and we could go on, but we are out of time. You and your wife, Joni, have been married for some 47 years this summer, and we've talked about your kids and a great career. We thank you for your service, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Like most all Vietnam veterans, Lee McClesky regards the heroes, those who did not return to live out the vital years of their youth. He honors his own survival by giving back to his community every day. We salute Air Force Colonel Lee McClesky for his service, as we salute all veterans. I'm Tom Turbeville. Please join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.